All right, well, that's my cue that we're about to get started. So first of all, my name is Kristen, and from all of us on David's team, I just want to extend a heartfelt thank you, as always, for committing to spend this time with us today. We know how busy you all are, especially during the holiday season, and it's not always easy to step away, but we are really grateful to have you here with us. For anyone who is joining us for the first time, I'll just take a quick moment to share a little bit about David. So David has more than 35 years of experience as a family therapist, workshop facilitator, lecturer, and advisor to leadership executives from all over the world. He is a best-selling author, respected thought leader, and sought-after speaker. David is so passionate about helping leaders lead better, and these monthly webinars are just one of the many ways that David is able to share his message and his knowledge with as many people as possible. Today, we are so delighted to be joined by Annette, and it really is a gift that she's going to share her story with us. For any of you that have joined us in a webinar previously, you may recognize Annette. She'll often share during the Q&A period and ask insightful questions or share powerful input from her experiences. She brings a fantastic energy and light to any virtual experience I've ever had the pleasure of sharing with her. And I just am so excited for her story today. So again, thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of our community. And without further ado, here is David and Annette.
Kristen, thank you so very much. And thank you everybody for investing your time today in this webinar. So folks, let me just share with you my vision. For those of you who know me, this is a very short amount of time that we have together, but I really am about, this is not a job for me, this is my life's work, about creating a more fully human world. A safe and caring, high trust, courageous, honest, real, a world with strong character. And it starts within ourselves, permeates from there to the places that we work and live, to our families, our communities, and eventually our world. But it starts really ultimately with ourselves. And what got me thinking about this, this is supposed to be a holiday message, a Christmas message, if you will, however you celebrate this time of year. And I thought, well, I wanted to give an inspiring message about caring and an inspiring message about living. And really what I began to think about is I'm also noticing at the same time that this is a caring time of year, and I notice the generosity of people in our communities and our families. What I also notice is that there's a lot of impatience, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of divisiveness. As I work with organizations this fall, what I'm finding is coming out of this pandemic is, people are divided in our workplaces. People have been hurt over the last 2.5, 3 years. We've had policies that have been divisive. We've had unintentionally. We've had some pain. And I thought, well, I want to give a message that's real, and at the same time, it's inspiring. And so I started to really reflect on what I might bring to you. And as we think about being human, which is really ultimately what I'm about, bringing humanity to the world, it's much more than just being nice and being pleasing. You're going to hear the difference between pleasing and real loving. Pleasing comes from a place of insecurity versus loving that comes from overflow. Being human is more than just polite. Yes, it would be nice to have these three things in our world today when we see a lack of civility, but it's more than that. It's a deeper journey. And I want to really share with you the journey into what it means to be authentic and how does it really bring that humanness forward. So we're going to go on a journey today for this next hour and a half. If you can join us for the last half an hour. The first half an hour I'm going to spend on number 1 and 2 is that I want to build a leadership case for forgiveness, because to really open our hearts fully with each other, that it becomes genuine, that it becomes real, that it becomes from the heart, and frankly, that it comes from a place that requires little effort, but there's also this notion of taking a deeper journey into what we have come to understand as forgiveness. It's not a popular word, forgiveness. We'd far rather, much easier to talk about vengeance and revenge and getting even. But I'm going to talk about this from an authentic perspective. Number two, I want to give you a roadmap for forgiveness. What does it really mean to forgive? And I want to share some of my own experience of something that I've been through, some of what I've been through. And then what we're going to do is that this is where Annette will come in, and I'll be introducing Annette in a half an hour here to share her story. She's got a very powerful forgiveness story. And then we will have a half an hour of engaging and asking, what I call A and E, so that we'll have a chance to really reflect on this and share. If you can stay around for the last half an hour, that would be amazing. So let's get started. What does forgiveness have to do with leadership? This is a question that I'm going to pose for you. And one of the things that I've always been impressed by this man, Nelson Mandela, and I've read deeply about his life. I've read deeply about his experience in being unjustly imprisoned for 27 years. And the first thing that Nelson Mandela said when he got out of prison, he said, let's forgive. How did he come to that? When you're unjustly in prison for 27 years. So here's the cell that he spent a good part of that 27 years in. And he had a very important statement. He said that as I walked out the door toward the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew that if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison. Most of us today, none of us in this call, I don't imagine, have had 27 years of being imprisoned unjustly. But I'll tell you what, at some point in our life, we're going to experience injustice. If you are alive, this is part of the human experience. And so we all have our own prison cells that we have to deal with at some point in our life. And the question becomes, how do we deal with injustice in our life? And I'm going to suggest that it has a strong leadership imperative, not to mention a personal imperative. So what does forgiveness have to do with your leadership? What we saw was that Nelson Mandela would not have had the impact that he had he not gone through his process of forgiveness, so that it could be real. It was authentic. It wasn't some platitude. It was real. And how we deal with our own injustice in life will impact your leadership, will impact your life. And it doesn't have to mean a prison cell unjustly. So how many of you have felt this on your teams, in your families? Irritability and tension, divisiveness, gossip and blame, burnout, over control and bullying. As these qualities, as these personality traits or tendencies happen within our workplace, these are indicators of a need for some forgiveness. This is my premise. And there isn't a leader in this room that has not dealt with some of this in their organization. Now, it's far easier to see a lack or see these defects, if you will, outside of yourself. Far easier to see them in others than it is to see it in ourselves. But whenever we see these tendencies, there is an opportunity to ask ourselves, what have we done to forgive? Now, on the other side of the ledger, we have what's these positive qualities that we want to have exhibited in our organization: inner well-being, psychological safety, trust, work-life balance, and passion. And if we're going to experience the right side of the ledger, my experience is to make these genuine, we have to really examine what have we done to forgive in our life, to deal with the injustice in our lives. Because if we haven't authentically faced the injustice in our life, my experience is that this inner well-being, psychological safety, full trust, work-life balance, and passion just simply won't be fully possible. We talk about work-life balance. And if we really, truly want balance in our life, we have to go inside. Passion is an interesting notion. I have had several people come to me and said, I just can't find my passion today. And my experience is that every single person that I've met that has had difficulty accessing their passion are people who have pain in their life that they've had to wall up to protect themselves. And the very protection from the hurt that they've been caused in their life actually becomes a prison that protects them from their passion. If you block off any aspect of yourself, you block it all off. So if we want to have a full functioning, fully authentic leadership where we bring our full selves to the world and to our work, we cannot avoid the notion of how we have dealt with injustice and this notion of forgiveness in our life. You can't run from it. And if we can run from it, I guess, but we can't hide, and we will miss out on the full expression of the human experience. So what is forgiveness? We talk a great deal about it. We hear about it. What actually is it? Well, I'm going to give you a definition. First of all, I'm going to tell you what forgiveness from my perspective is not. It's not a Sunday school platitude. It's not condoning the behavior. It's not blaming yourself, and it's not easy. This is not some easy process that we're going to walk around forgiving. If we walk around pretending to forgive because someone says it's the right thing to do, it won't be authentic and it won't be sustainable. So what is forgiveness? Well, I'm going to give you a definition. It's only a definition. It's not the definition of forgiveness. I would encourage you all to come up with your own definition of forgiveness. My definition of forgiveness is simple. It's a journey to freedom through the suffering of injustice. And so it's ultimately, folks, an inside job, okay? When we talk about forgiveness, it's a triggering word for many people. Many people have been raised in a religious context, and that was painful. And that the word forgiveness can itself be triggering. So if you aren't comfortable with the word forgiveness, I'm going to offer to you an invitation for another phrase, which is it's ultimately, folks, about letting go. It's ultimately about letting go. So regardless of whether you use the word forgiveness and you don't like that word, these are synonymous to me, letting go and forgiveness. And I'm going to suggest again that it's an inside job. It's not revenge. It's not necessarily getting an apology. We don't do this to get an apology. If we happen to get an apology, that can be free. It can be helpful. But the freedom doesn't come outside of ourselves. I've walked so many people through that have been unjustly, a relative has been killed. And the notion is if we just get vengeance, if I just get revenge, I will be free. But in fact, that's not the case. I'm not advocating in any way to allow injustice to not happen. But if the freedom component, the true forgiveness, which is coming back to my definition of freedom, has to come from within. And that in itself is freeing because it doesn't depend on what somebody else does for us to feel that sense of freedom. This is my whole notion in my work around authenticity. For those of you who know my work, know that we talk about the highest point on the planet, which is Mount Everest. What is less known is that the lowest point on the planet at more than 8,000 meters below the sea level is the Mariana Trench. And so it's virtually an inverted Everest. And we live in a world that reveres and honors height as defining success. And what's the next summit that we're going to achieve? And my argument is that what we're talking about today is the journey down, the journey inside of ourselves to the deepest part of our soul. And I'm going to suggest that success, folks, isn't just about height. Success is also about depth. And it's the depth of our character. And so what I'm really going to be talking to you about today is deepening versus distracting. We have all kinds of ways of distracting ourselves from connecting with who we are meant to be. But this is the journey down, the journey within ourselves. That's the journey through recovery. So the cave, as Joseph Campbell said, that you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek. If you're actually, if you know, you might get triggered by this conversation today. By the way, I want to just extend an invitation to reach out to either Annette and myself, and we'll give you our contact information in the chat room by the end of during the session. So if it gets triggered, please feel free to reach out to either of us. But if you're feeling reluctant to take this, or you're feeling resistant to take this journey that I'm going to talk to you about, this roadmap that I'm going to give you right now, just know you'll get there in your right time, but just know whatever you fear, that's where the treasure will lie within you. All right. Now what I want to do is give you this roadmap. And it is a roadmap to forgiveness. It is not the roadmap. It's my experience. It's the roadmap called that I refer to as the authentic way. And it starts with anger. On the outer side is anger. Now, anger is not a popular emotion today. Most of us have never been allowed to experience the emotion of anger without pain. So that anger for so many of us has been painful. And so we've been reluctant, particularly if you've been raised in a family system that did not allow you to feel angry. What happens is that we internalize it and we develop a rule that says, I can't be angry. And boy, to forgive, I can't allow myself to forgive. I don't want to conjure up this notion that you have to be angry. All I'm saying is, if you're dealing with injustice, there's going to be anger. And you can't fully have forgiveness without allowing yourself to feel angry if the anger is there. If there's no anger, if there genuinely is no anger, you don't have to make it up. What we're talking about here is to be honest. That's why it's not a Sunday school platitude. You have to go through this process that I'm going to outline here in order to be free. And again, this is my process. You don't have to go through my process, but you have to go through a process. And so what I would suggest is, what is your own process and experience with anger? I have to share with you what I went through a few years ago. Is I had a business partner that essentially stole $55,000 from me. I invested $55,000 in a product and I got nothing back. And so when I was in the angry stage, I went to a lawyer and I said, listen, I need to fight to get this money back. And this is a natural part of the forgiving process. Now, this was a rational decision. My lawyer helped me make it a rational decision. He said, well, you'll likely win this case, but it'll cost you about $55,000 in legal bills. It'll cost you about a year or more of your energy. We'll likely get that back, but it's a risk. Do you want to take that risk? And at that point, I began to realize this would not be a good investment. But there's nothing wrong with, in the anger stage, to push for what you need to do. But the main thing I want to stress is, with all these emotions that I'm going to take you through in this roadmap, I treat emotions, and I've learned this from my own experience. You have to treat emotions like a child in a child seat in the back. If you've ever driven with a child in the back seat and they start to fuss and they start to get angry and they start to be upset, what you do is you pull the car over. If you have the time, you stop the car, you take the child out of the car seat and you attend to their feelings and you soothe them and give them and nurture them what they need. You nurture it. And then when they start to settle down, you put them back in the car seat and you get back in the driver's seat. You don't put the child in the driver's seat when they're angry. You don't let anger run your life. What's important is to see and experience your anger without necessarily impulsively acting on it. So there's two ways that you express anger. One is externally and one is internally. When we see external anger, you see irritability. This divisiveness. Gossip is an indirect way of showing that we're angry. And anger is an emergency emotion. It's a valid feeling, but these behaviors, often what they do is they become a defense against actually feeling the anger. If you stop the gossip, if you stop the blame and just say, are you angry right now? Oftentimes they'll be in denial. I know this within myself. Far easier to gossip about someone than to face my own anger. Over control, bullying. These are all defenses against actually allowing ourselves to feel angry. Anger will not hurt if it's felt without impulsively acting on it. It doesn't necessarily have to be a hurtful feeling. Sometimes you have to say, I am angry. And this is a way of establishing clear boundaries. It's a human biological emotion. All right. Now, if you don't give yourself permission to externalize the anger, what'll happen is you internalize it, and it turns to self-criticism, depression, perfectionism, tension and anxiety, unbridled busyness, and burnout. These are all indicators that potentially that we have not allowing ourselves to feel the anger of something in our life. And so what happens is busyness, which is very prevalent in our world today. We just stay busy so that we don't have to actually stop and be with our own experience. And again, this is all distracting as opposed to deepening. And these are all coping mechanisms. They're all protective mechanisms that we've learned in our life. And what I would suggest is they're not bad or good. Please hear me. I'm not making a judgment here, even though it may sound like that. My intention is to bring compassion to what's really going on inside. If we're struggling with depression, there's a high probability. Where is the anger in there that I'm not allowing myself to feel? So that's the first stage in the map. And I had to accept I'm angry. Okay, when you're angry. Resentment is when we hang on to that anger. And this statement has been around a while. It's hard to know who actually is attributed to making this statement. So I'll just call it anonymous, my favorite author. But resentment is like drinking poison, hoping it will kill your enemies. And so if we have to get past the anger, anger in itself will never stay. If you stay angry, it will never be healing. However, anger is, especially if we deflect from it, if we begin to actually face our anger, what we do is that we move to the next level below that, which is the cause of your anger. What has been done to you? And you face honestly and truthfully what is going on, what happened to you. As we say, when I work with people who've been through trauma, you've got to look the dragon in the eye. You have to say, what has been done to you? And you face it. Now, I must say, we've all learned this in high school biology, that sunlight is the best disinfectant. You have to bring this out into the open and face it honestly. What you don't need to do is to put it on Facebook. As we say, sunlight might be the best disinfectant, but sunlight will also kill you. If you bring it too much into the light and you don't have boundaries around that, too much sun will kill you. I'm not suggesting that you have to put this on Facebook. In fact, I think this impulse to put it on social media when we've been upset about something is actually a defense against the courage to look inside and face our own emotion. So but it is required to bring it up out of the darkness of our mind and our head and bring it into our heart and into the opening, at least with one other person, a confidant, a therapist, a coach, a guide, a pastor, somebody that can help us through this journey. It's a lonely journey, but honestly, it can't be done alone. I've not found this map to work if you just work this through alone. It can begin alone, but it really have to share it with another human being. So then you look honestly, what actually was the cause of your anger? Then you look at what is the impact. And this is where you go below the surface and examine feelings that aren't necessarily very easy to articulate. Where did you get hurt? What grief needs to be experienced underneath that anger and underneath the cause of that anger? I'm very curious. There isn't a person in this room that hasn't experienced some loss during this pandemic, a loss of our freedoms, a loss of loved ones, a loss of our health, a loss of spontaneity, that we just haven't been able to pick up the phone and go for a coffee with someone, with a friend. We've all experienced loss. And my question for you is, what have you done with that loss? If we don't face the impact, if we don't face what's really going on inside, we will turn it into anger as a way of deflection, loneliness, betrayal, rejection, embarrassment, humiliation, jealousy, insecurity, shame, guilt, confusion. Where in your life have you experienced those emotions in your life? And what have you done with those emotions? What have you done? As we say, violence is what happens when we don't know what to do with our suffering. And so this is what we do. If we don't acknowledge, and it's not a criticism. We're not trained as a human species. Most of us have never learned in our family how to deal with those feelings and how to be okay with them, because we have this notion that we have to fix them. You can't fix those feelings. And so what we do is that we protect our children from feeling that, because we don't know how to fix it. And in fact, if you've got kids that are going through this, I've got a good friend who has his son lived in the basement for 2 years, taking a university class. There's 2 years of loss of schooling, of connecting with his students. That's what university is meant for. As we always used to say, don't let go into class get in the way of your education. It's that whole community that he lost. Well, let's acknowledge it. You can't fix it. There's no blame. Blame just covers up our lack of awareness or courage to face those feelings. But I mean, it's a natural stage in the forgiveness process to blame, but let's look at the anger when there's blame, and then let's take ownership for what's gone on underneath it. And by embracing those feelings in the presence of a human being who cares, it is by nature healing to accept them and acknowledge them, rather than trying to fix or deflect from them, okay? Then you get to meaning. Now, what I mean by meaning is when we're hurt early on in our life, we're organisms. We're meaning-making organisms. And every experience that had in our life, we make meaning out of it. That's how we learn and grow. And when we've been hurt early on in our life, we develop survival mechanisms. For example, one of the ways that we make meaning is that we have to please people in order to feel safe. If you've been hurt when you're a child, you develop a meaningful, a way of protecting yourself by saying, if I can just make people happy around me, then I'll be safe. Now, that's a survival mechanism. It had a good, it was useful and probably necessary at one time in your life, but just recognize that meaning, when it fulfills its function, it's overusing its function, it can become destructive. And this is what happens when we start carrying people instead of caring about people, when we start to please people at the expense of our own needs. And so that we learn to survive today in ways that actually become self-destructive. So if you're finding that might be a meaningful message for you, go back and say, where do you need to acknowledge the anger, the cause, and the impact? We have to achieve to prove my worth. I see this all the time with highly successful entrepreneurs and leaders. I have to prove myself. And if I prove, it often comes when your worth is in your achievement. That's different than just bringing a healthy sense of achievement. But when you're driven to achieve, you have no work-life balance, and it often stems from the fact that my worth is dependent on, if I can just achieve enough, then I will be safe. Or you wall up to protect yourself. You just build a wall around yourself that at the time was necessary to protect yourself, but it becomes, if it overexceeds its function, you wall up and protect yourself from finding your true passion in life, okay? Now, then you get to what you wanted from the person, and you just get honest. This is what I would have wanted. And you just get honest about that without blame, but you just acknowledge this wholeheartedly. And then you get to the core. When you begin to see empathy, where you see the lessons that you could learn, you see the gifts in all this. Oh, this happened to me for a reason. I don't need to like it, but I can begin to feel the gifts. I can feel a sense of gratitude. And then we can be at a point where we're letting go. Now, you might get to this point right now and you say, hey, I can think of some injustice in my life. There's no way I'm ready to feel any gratitude. Then you're not ready to be there. Go back and look at which of those stages are missing. You can't force yourself into this. But folks, ultimately, you got to get to a point. If you want freedom, you need to get to the point where you say, I'm going to let it go. Now, what does letting go actually mean? And how do you know whether you've forgiven or not? Well, many of you have seen this slide. Any of you hang around me, this is my wall of influence. And these are the 25 most influential people in my life. And whenever I share this slide, inevitably, I will get asked the question, would you put somebody up there that you hate? Would you put somebody up there that caused you harm, that brought you injustice in your life? And my response to that is, it depends. So I experienced trauma growing up from my parents, but I put my parents on this wall because underneath, I knew they did the best they could. Now, this business partner of mine that took $55,000 of my money, would I put him up there? No, he wouldn't be worth getting up there. Now, does that mean that I'm still angry at him? Well, there's still some time that I could be angry. I have to accept that. And maybe you could argue a case that I haven't really forgiven him if I wouldn't put him on my wall, but I don't think it's necessary to put everybody in your life on your wall that caused you injustice. What I hope is that if I ever met this man in public, that I could shake his hand and inside of myself say, thank you. You know, he taught me a $55,000 lesson. Okay. He taught me, you know what, when you get into business with people, make sure you get expectations and accountabilities really clear. It was a very expensive lesson, but I'm very grateful, but it doesn't mean that I have to go into business with him again or that he has to be on my wall. Let's get honest about that and let's be real about it. Okay. So in conclusion, folks, what I want to say is that the ultimate purpose of doing all of this work today is that we can open our hearts with each other, that we can be honest with ourselves and with the people that we care about, and that we can be more genuinely caring to the people in our lives. You know, I love this little poem. I've wept in the night at my shortness of sight, that to someone's need was I blind, but I've never yet had a twinge of regret for being a little too kind. What I hope is that we can really face and take ownership for our own inner pain, our own anger, that we can bring it down to a sense of real compassion, letting go, and having empathy for the people around us. Okay. Forgiveness, Mark Twain said, is the fragrance of the violet sheds on the heel that has crushed it. There is the fragrance of forgiveness when we begin to really fully embrace this journey. Okay, so on that note, I am now going to introduce you to our guest speaker. Everyone has a story, and Annette, believe me, has a story. Let me introduce this gem to you. Annette Stanwick has decades of executive experience, having served in senior positions in several Alberta hospitals as vice president of a large hospital in Toronto, and more recently as vice president medical affairs of the world-renowned Gimbel Eye Center. As an international speaker, coach, and best-selling author of Forgiveness, The Mystery and Miracle, she has been nominated for several awards and is recipient of the Integrity Award presented by Rotary International for personal and business practices. Through an unforgettable story of forgiveness, she will help you understand the power of forgiveness in life and leadership, and will provide some proven tools to empower you in forgiving yourself and others. Annette, you're now on. Thank you very much for joining us. It's such a privilege to have you here, my friend.
Oh, well, thank you so much, David. And thank you so much for the comments that you've made and the roadmap and the illumination that you have given to forgiveness this morning, because it truly today's topic is vital, because none of us are immune to being hurt, and none of us are immune to hurting others. And everywhere we look, we see hurting people, whether it's on the news, in the newspaper, on the television, or whether it's in the workplace, in our schools, in the places of worship, in our communities, in our homes, and even in our own hearts and relationships. And people often don't know how to heal from those painful experiences that they've been through. And so they carry them. They can even carry them for a lifetime if they don't know how to heal. And the inability to heal and forgive often is passed down from generation to generation. In fact, oftentimes it's like a badge of honor. Unfortunately, it looks backwards there. It's like a badge of honor. We never apologize nor forgive. And families do carry that down. They carry it down from grandparent, great-grandparent to grandparent to parent to child, and on and on. And so we need to learn how to break that cycle. You know, my dad was he was an absolutely wonderful role model for forgiveness. And I'll never forget how when I was in middle school, and I had written a nasty note about my teacher, called her a terrible name, and she found that note and read it out in class, which was absolutely humiliating. Then she told my grandmother told my mother told my dad, and my dad came in from being outside on the farm and came in the living room, and he said, "Annette, come over and sit with me for a while and let's talk." He said, "What's been happening at school?" And you know, that just opened up the floodgates, and I started sobbing, and I told him what I had done and what the teacher had done and how I, called her this horrible name. And he said, "Annette, I'm really disappointed because we don't talk like that in our home and we don't call people names. But I want you to know there's nothing you can ever do to make me stop loving you. And I forgive you." He then took me, and we went in the car, and we went to my teacher's home, Mrs. Burgermeister, and we sat in her living room, and I was sitting right beside him. He had his arm around me, and we talked about what happened, and he helped me to apologize. More than 20 years later, Mrs. Burgermeister showed up at our home after my father had died suddenly as a result of a heart attack. When the doorbell rang, I answered the door, and there stood Mrs. Burgermeister. And I looked at her as I welcomed her into our home, and I said, "Oh, Mrs. Burgermeister, I am so sorry for that horrible name that I called you so many years ago." And she looked at me and said, "You still remember that?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Oh, my dear, I forgive you." And we collapsed in each other's arms. That was my very first experience with forgiveness and apology. But my story now surrounds the death of my brother. My brother Soren was murdered, and I'm not sure. Can we take this screenshot off of so people can maybe see my full face, David? Excuse me. One of my brothers
is, Annette, that I need to protect people's anonymity because
Okay.
this is being recorded. So I don't know how to. What do you need?
Oh, I just want them to see me on the full screen. That's all. But that's okay.
I would love to know how to do that, and I
Okay.
don't have the technology at knowing how to do that.
Okay, that's all right. We'll
Kristen,
just
if you could help me with that, I would very much appreciate it. Do you know how I might do that?
Spotlight her? I'm just seeing if we can spotlight her.
It's always going to, she is spotlighted, but it's going to be a small, because without bringing everyone up on the screen, I can't do that.
Can you make me a host just for this portion?
If you close the slide, David, it won't have just Annette showing.
Oh, okay. Listen, let's just go on. Never mind. Never mind. Anyway, the story that I want to share with you now is that my brother Soren was tragically murdered in Virginia in 1999. Long distance trucker had hauled a load of potatoes to Richmond, Virginia. And he was unfortunately found shot to death in the sleeper and cab of his truck. And as a surrogate mother to my three brothers, I thought I could not handle that pain and that grief and that anger. And for a year and a half, we didn't know who had taken Soren's life or why. And those unanswered questions just plagued me. And I'm ordinarily not an angry woman, but I was angry. I was angry because we didn't have answers. And one night in an angry episode in my bed, in our bed, and my husband was laying there sound asleep next to me, and he didn't hear any of this. He didn't know what was going on. I was trying to identify who might be, what kind of person could have killed my brother. And I was going through a list. There must be angry, bitter, callous, dangerous, deceitful, evil, and the list went on. You see, I was creating the picture of a monster in my mind. And I don't know what your faith background is, but I heard a voice that night, and I have come to recognize that voice as the voice of God. And he called me by name. He said, Annette, your brother's murderer is deeply wounded. Deeply wounded. That didn't sound like all of those words that I was conjuring up to create that picture of a monster. Deeply wounded almost sounded like compassion. And then he said, I love your brother's murderer as much as I love you, and as much as I love your brother. Wow. You see, I knew that he loved me because of the experiences I'd been through. But my brother, he was a Vietnam War veteran. He was a gunner on the back of a truck and had strafed villages. And he said, Annette, I don't know how many people I've killed in my life while I was in the military. But yet God was saying, I love your brother. He didn't say, I love what your brother's murderer did, but he said, I love your brother's murderer. And you know, I wrestled with that, put the pillow over my head because I didn't want to hear it anymore. But yet I knew in my heart of hearts it was true. And finally I accepted it and I fell asleep in peace. Well, the very next morning I went down to breakfast. My husband was already sitting at the table and I told him what I had experienced. And then I said, Clay, I hope the day will come when I can tell my brother's murderer how much he's loved by God. And there are also people in prison that need to hear this as well. Now, my husband was stunned because he knew my anger and my grief and my mourning and that I needed grief counseling. He knew, but he saw the change in me overnight. To go from being angry to wanting to tell my brother's murderer how much he was loved by God. I call that my midnight miracle because there was such a change. There was such a change in me. Over that period of time, my motorcycle became a real instrument of healing. And yes, I've been a biker babe. And after a year and a half, we found out that there were 5 people involved in my brother's death. 3 brothers, their mother, and a cousin. 5 people. And when that story opened up, I said, I've got to get out on my motorcycle to do some more processing. And so we rode with a group to Three Hills in Alberta to an antique car show. And as we were riding along, I was praying that God would help me accept the story that had just opened up. And then I also wanted to know why is Soren part of this story? And right there on my motorcycle, I heard God's voice again. And this time he said, forgive them. They didn't know what they were doing. Didn't know what they were doing? There was an answer to why. They didn't know my brother. They didn't know who he was, how much he was loved, what a wonderful character he was. All they knew is they wanted his truck. He stood in the way, and so they killed him. But that other part, forgive them. No, 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 don't ask me to forgive. They've killed my brother. Forgive as I have forgiven you. Forgive, and I will forgive you. You know, I wrestled with that right there on my motorcycle, and I cranked open my throttle and passed all the other 12 bikers in our group. They just thought I was kicking up my heels again, because I often do that. I can't stay inside a box very well. They didn't know the story that had just opened up. Finally, I said, okay, God, if that's what you want, then you're going to have to make me willing, and you're going to have to make it possible. Well, a few months later, our family found ourselves in the courtroom in Virginia, presenting victim impact statements, because Travis, the one who had pulled the trigger in my brother's death, had confessed, and he was being sentenced. He didn't have to stand trial. 10 of us presented victim impact statements, and I had asked to be the last because I had known my brother the longest. I spent weeks preparing my victim impact statement. I talked about the anger and the need for counseling, and how Soren had been ripped out of our lives and out of our family events, and how much we missed him, and how traumatized we all were. But then at the end of my victim impact statement, and the courtroom was packed, it was a very public case. At the end of my victim impact statement, I called him by name and I said, Travis, there's something even more important that I need to let you know. And I know that God will never love what you did to my brother, but he loves you in spite of what you've done. Forgiveness will never excuse or erase what has happened, but I hope that you can accept God's love and forgiveness. You know, friends, right there on the witness stand, I had a sensation like soothing warm oil pouring over me. Well, there was no oil pouring over me, but science is proving that when we forgive and let go, we are healed at the cellular level. And I believe that I was right there on the witness stand. I was being healed at the cellular level. When I got up to go back to my seat, I was a transformed woman. 5 people went away to serve the rest of their lives in prison, but I came away a free woman. And you know, after that experience, I couldn't keep quiet. I was transformed. I was changed. I was free. I had made the choice to release my grip on the anger and the bitterness and the resentment and the hatred. And forgiveness, the miracle of forgiveness had changed me. You know, our stories need to be heard. And right there in the courtroom that day, my story was being heard by, I don't know who all was in that courtroom, not only the judge and the lawyers and Travis and family members. When I walked out of the courthouse that day, the media surrounded me. They surrounded me. I wasn't prepared for that. One person asked a question. How could you forgive your brother's murderer? I didn't have an answer prepared. I said, the only way I could forgive my brother's murderer is that God drenched me with his love. You know, forgiveness gave me a passion to help other people heal. It gave me a passion to tell people how important it is to be able to process our pain and to tell our stories and to make positive choices to forgive and let go. I was catapulted into speaking about forgiveness. And then I was encouraged to write a book. And I've written the book, Forgiveness, the Mystery and Miracle. It's an award-winning and best-selling book. It's global. It's having a global influence. But because I couldn't keep quiet, people wanted me to be involved in restorative justice. I had no idea what restorative justice was. So I attended a couple of events, and it's where you restore the dignity of those that have been harmed by crime. Those are the victims. And here where you restore the dignity of the offender by getting them together and hearing each other, listening to each other's perspectives. It was a stunning experience when I was invited to speak to a group of men serving life sentences for murder. They came from 3 different federal prisons here in Alberta. And I'll never forget standing there in front of them. They wanted me to do a 3-hour seminar for them on forgiveness. I told my story. I read my victim impact statement. And as I looked around the room, I realized that every single one of them, as I caught eyes with them, were loved by God. You know, it was a stunning experience for them to open up their hearts of compassion and empathy and sorrow for what I had been through. It was just so amazing. And for them to express their sorrow, my eyes opened up and I saw these men that had each committed horrendous crimes, but yet they had hearts of compassion toward me as the sister of a homicide victim. Do you know, by the end of the night, we were turning to each other. They were talking about their regret, their remorse, their shame, their guilt. And by the end of the night, we were turning to each other in our tears, and we were healing. Absolutely unforgettable experience. I'll never forget it as long as I live. It was suggested that my husband and I should develop a seminar and take it into the federal prisons. So we did. We developed what's known as the IOU seminar, Inward, Outward, and Upward, a journey toward healing. And I'll never forget meeting with prison wardens and proposing this 2-day seminar. One of the wardens was absolutely in tears. He said, "I've never heard anything like this before," but they paved the way for us to go in and work with inmates that are serving life sentences. We facilitate this 2-day seminar. We limit it to 16 people at a time so that we have opportunity to have excellent discussions and for them to tell their stories. And do you know that 85 to 90% of them are deeply wounded? Deeply wounded. And many of them have never had the opportunity to share those stories. Remember what I said a few minutes ago, that we all deserve for our stories to be heard. By the end of those 2 days, going inward, helping them to go inward and identify what has happened to them, and then looking outward as to what the impact of their crime, and then looking upward for forgiveness and understanding and accepting forgiveness. We see healing happening right before our eyes. To date, we've worked with more than 200 men and women serving life sentences for murder. The stories are unbelievable. If you could understand the abuse, the addiction, the neglect, the crime, the violence that these people have been exposed to, you can understand. It doesn't give rationale for why they've done what they've done, but you can understand how their lives have gone astray. We've worked with men and women in addiction recovery. We work monthly with women recovering from addiction, incarceration, and sexual exploitation. And when we're able to listen to their stories, we spend a full day every month, and it's just so amazing. And they want to know, when are we coming back? And when we do come back, they come around and throw their arms around us. They're so thrilled that we're there to help them to recover and to find peace and freedom and to forgive themselves and to forgive others. We also spend time on the streets often, talking with people that are homeless. And more recently have spent time in a halfway house with women that are just coming out of incarceration. This last month worked with them in relation to helping them understand their values and their strengths are the bedrock of their growth as women. And we're going to be doing monthly sessions with those women starting in January. You know, as a result of all of this work, the book, the speaking that I've done, the seminars, and you know, David, you talk about letting go. My signature message is let go and live free. Yes, I understand that forgiveness is a scary word for people. Number one, how they've been raised. And number two, people feel that if I forgive somebody, I'm condoning what they've done. No, forgiveness is about embracing your own issues and then making a positive choice to release your grip on the anger, the fear, the regret, the shame, and the blame. So I've created a freedom formula, and because I ran out of time, I don't have a slide for you to see today. But it's a 5-step formula, and it's easy for you to write these steps down. A 5-step freedom formula. I'm a freedom facilitator. I help people let go of painful past experiences, fears that confine and control them, and also let go of self-limiting beliefs and behaviors. So this is my freedom formula. The first step is to face the issues. You know, we all have issues in our lives, and I encourage you, if you have some issues, make a list of all the issues that you have in your life, and then circle one and focus on it. Do one at a time. The second step is to feel the pain. What is the pain and suffering that you are experiencing as a result of that issue that you've identified? The third step is to make positive choices. You know, after my brother's death, and I had attended a seminar called Choices, Adventures of a Lifetime. It was a 5-day seminar, but I came away understanding, and I want to pound this into you as well. You may not be able to choose what happens to you, but you always have a choice in how you respond. I made 3 very, very important choices after my brother's death. The first choice was that I wanted to be happy again. You know, friends, we can be happy even though we're not happy about what has happened. I wanted to be happy again. The second choice was I didn't want to be consumed. And you know, when we're struggling in a painful, ugly, hurtful situation, it doesn't have to be as horrible as murder. Maybe something as recent as yesterday, argument with your husband or your wife, or something in the workplace. I wanted to, what was it I said? I wanted to be happy. Oh, I didn't want to be consumed. I didn't want to be consumed. Make a choice that you don't want to be consumed. And my third choice was I wanted to grow. I'll tell you, I never dreamed how I would grow as a result of what happened to my brother. Never, never, never in my wildest imagination could I imagine how I would grow and the things that would happen. The fourth step is to let go of the pain. That's the forgiveness piece. It's about making a positive choice, is also going for counseling, reading books, working through this process on your own, or a trusted counselor, pastor. David has listed several people that you can go to. The fourth step is to let go of the hurt. Make a positive choice to release your grip. You know, it's so easy to hang on tight to that anger and that fear and that bitterness and resentment and hatred. And I have to admit, I held on to it for quite some time. But when I made a positive choice to release my grip on it, what a difference it made. And forgiveness, friends, is not about condoning what the other person has done. It's about making the choice that you want to heal and you no longer want to be controlled by the painful experience. And the fifth step is feel the freedom. You know, friends, I can't tell you enough how free I felt after forgiving my brother's killers. And I did it 3 times in the courtroom in Virginia with different people that were involved in his brother's death. But you know, forgiveness issues in the workplace. Leaders, you know, I created a philosophy of management many years ago, and I have had it hanging in my office. And from the staff and my managers, I said, I want to challenge you. If I'm not meeting this philosophy of management, I want you to talk to me about it. Do you know, 2 staff nurses mustered the courage to come and talk to me. And I had breached one of my statements where I said, I believe in responsible sharing of information, feelings, attitudes, and values. I had breached a confidentiality in a meeting, but those 2 nurses came and talked with me. Oh, the courage that it took. I acknowledged what I'd done. I went back to that meeting and I apologized. And do you know, there was such healing that happened. But we have to acknowledge what we've done. And you know, leaders, we as leaders are not perfect. We're not perfect. It's okay to be wrong. As leaders, we all make mistakes and missteps, but we need humility and forgiveness. You know, relationships are at the basis of everything we do. And if our relationships are in trouble, our life is in trouble. If we do nothing, if we are embroiled in a painful situation and we do nothing, it resolves nothing. It resolves nothing. So do nothing solves nothing, friends. So I have I encourage you to use the 4 C's of courage to connect. 4 C's of courage to connect. 1 is it's important to have be committed to relationships and harmony. The second C is communication. Communication is 2-way. It's about speaking, but it's also about listening with speaking and listening with truth and integrity without defensiveness. The third C is confidence. Have confidence in your desire to create a positive outcome. And the 4th C is compassion. Compassion for yourself and for others. And if we can muster compassion for ourselves and others, we can honor each other's perspectives and listen to each other's stories. Compassion creates kindness, and kindness in turn creates love and forgiveness. Friends, there are risks and rewards and regrets. I encourage you to take the risk to forgive yourself, to forgive others. The rewards can be so phenomenal. I just can't stress that enough. But I never tell someone you must forgive, because it is a deep personal journey. But think, when I talk about the risks and the rewards, but you also have to think about the regrets if you do not take a positive action. People often say the hardest person to forgive is myself. And you know, friends, that is so true. I have another formula, and I'm going to go through it very quickly. It's called the Idea Cafe of steps for self-forgiveness. And if you can write the words Idea Cafe down this left side, IDEA, and then cafe, CAFE. It's like a menu. And this is for steps to forgive yourself. The I stands for identify why you need to forgive yourself. The D stands for describe your feelings and the suffering caused by whatever you've done that has hurt someone else or hurt yourself, or things that you were unable to do. The E sense is to embrace the impact of your actions or your inactions. And the A of idea is acknowledge what you've learned. What have you learned about others? What have you learned about yourself? Okay, the word cafe the C stands for compassion. Compassion with yourself for what you've been through, but also compassion for others and how they've been hurt by something you've said or done or something that you were unable to do. The A stands for apologize. Apologize with deep meaning. You may apologize and somebody may not accept your apology right away, but apologize anyway. The F of cafe stands for forgive and let go of the past. What's past is past. We can't turn it around, friends. Forgive and let go of the past. And then the E stands for empower your freedom. Empower your freedom. Friends, if there's someone in your life that you need to forgive, including yourself, I really encourage you to do that today. Don't wait. It could be too late. And this is for us in leadership, but it's also for you and me in life in general. I encourage you to muster the courage to connect with others so that you can actually bridge the gap. You know, a good friend of mine, and he's been on this webinar, and I don't know if Warren Harbeck is here with us today, but he sent me a message a few weeks ago, and he said, Annette, you build bridges from alienation to belonging, and that bridge is forgiveness. Warren Harbeck, I was touched deeply by that statement. And friends, I encourage you to build a bridge between those that have hurt you or those that you have hurt. That bridge is forgiveness, and it's about letting go so that you can live free. I dare you to care enough so that you can heal by forgiving yourself and others. Forgiveness is one of the greatest gifts that we can give to ourselves and to others during this holiday season. And so I encourage you to forgive, let go, so you can live free. Thank you.